Yeah, could you please,
So we're about to start.
Julian, could you admit the people's?
Yeah.
All right, appreciate that. Okay. That's good.
Could you adjust the camera?
Oh, like this?
Yeah.
Okay.
People.
Oh, yeah. All right, there we go. Kind of weird, like doing like this. Guys, it's gonna be a bit weird. I'm gonna say it this way, not this way. All right. All right. Okay, let's start our whoa. There's our members here. So let's start our first fall guest speaker session at Longhorn Neurotech. And hello everyone, my name is Tony Che, and I'm the I'm gonna host the guest speaker session as a VP Outreach of Longhorn Neurotech. We Longhorn Neurotech are an undergrad student organization focused on brain-computer interface research and projects. Additionally, we help bridge undergrads to academia and industry neurotechnology by giving them hands-on experience with projects and connection with industry partners. It's a pleasure today to introduce Dr. Ivan Tashif and Dr. Justin Kilmark from Microsoft and Air Force Research Lab. Please give a warm welcome. Woo! Hey, so Dr. Ivan, short introduction. Dr. Tashif leads the Audio and Acoustic Research Group in Microsoft Research and is an affiliated professor at the University of Washington and is an honorary professor at the Technology University of Sofia, Bulgaria, and he also coordinates the Brain-Computer Interfaces project in Microsoft Research. Dr. Justin Kilmark is a research scientist at DCS Corporation and the member of the Brain Stimulation Team at the Air Force Research Lab, and he was the member of Rewire Lab under James Souser and the Loopy Lab under Gerald Louis Peacock at UT Austin. He also served as a research intern with Microsoft Brain-Computer Interface Team in 2021 to 2022. So to make a natural flow of our lecture, we have some rules. We will now have 30 minutes for each speakers to talk about the research and works. And after that, we will have a 15 minutes for Q&A, which we're using a Mentimeters. Please make sure to submit the questions you have throughout the talk so we can ask them in the Q&A session. You can find out the link in the chat. Thank you. And now we're gonna start. And it's all yours, Justin. Anybody. Right, let me. All right.
So you want me to share my screen, right?
Oh, yes, you're.
Okay, can you see this?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. First, thank you for the invitation. It is always a pleasure for me to talk with students and BCI enthusiasts wherever in the world they are. And today we're going to talk about brain-computer interfaces, a topic you guys are familiar with. And we are going to see what we have been doing here in Microsoft Research as part of our brain-computer interfaces project. And I'll carefully avoid to talk about the topic of 2 consecutive internships of Justin Kilmark in my team, so I'll give him the opportunity to tell you what exactly he has been working on, okay? And then, okay. So let's make a step back and talk about the neuroscience and the brain-computer interfaces. And I would like to start with citing Professor Christoph Koch, who is the chief scientist and president of Allen Institute for Brain Science here in Seattle. We don't even understand the brain of a worm. And just for your comparison, a brain of a worm contains 960 neurons. A brain of a human being contains 110 billion neurons. So just to give you understanding how far we are from fully understanding the brain of a human being. But neuroscience today is a well-developed research area with 26 defined areas, including computational neuroscience and BCI. This is where there is overlapping with us computer people. And it explores a very broad range of problems. Almost everything you touch here is complex and enormously exciting. But let's start even with the philosophical problem. Can a brain understand how another brain works, a system with the same complexity? And we'll go through the ethical problems here. Even if you can, should we read somebody's thoughts and emotions, or even worse, influence opinion about purchasing this or that good, or voting for this or for that political candidate? And from the moment we step on the technological area, everything is super difficult in brain-computer interfaces. However, the stakes are high. There are very big promises and perspective from curing neurological diseases to getting some ideas from Mother Nature for building some highly parallelized computer architectures. Talking about the brain-computer interfaces, they are nothing new or extraordinary. This is just a normal quest of humans for more and more direct control with the computer. Those who are old as me started with using punch cards. You see a stack in the most left, in the most left side, and this is how I did my first project in computers. You punch your punch cards on a special machine and then give you the operator a stack of cards, and this person just executes them on the computer, and next day you go to the kiosk and get your stack of punch cards wrapped up in the listing of execution. So you do roughly one compilation per day. But then we started to have a teletype, and you sit and you have direct communication with the computer. This went through much faster displays and modern keyboards. We are going through touch and gesture today, and this is more and more intuitive and reduces the path between brain, muscle, peripheral device, computer. And presumably at some point, we'll be able to do and to talk directly with the computer. But overall, this is just one small part of the entire brain-computer interfaces story. In general, we're talking about replacing and restoring capabilities of the brain, enhancing how we learn, how we memorize languages, new information, etc., etc. And all of this is a closed-loop system which literally acquires signals for the brain activity, does some pre-processing and feature extraction, and then converts those features to commands or to conclusions about the state of the brain. As you well know, the brain cortex has a specialized areas. And we know that here on the back is the visual cortex, because just the two big cables with neurons come from the eyes directly to that area. Here on the sides are obviously the hearing cortex, the auditory cortex, simply because 3,000 neurons from cochlea go and connected there. We should mention the switchboard of the brain, which is the primary sensory cortex and primary motor cortex. The neurons here are the largest. They have axons and very long dendrites. That literally goes through the brain stem and is connected to every single muscle in the motor cortex and to every single sensor in our bodies through the sensory cortex. And of course, here in the prefrontal cortex is the logical part, the memory, who we are, and how we feel, and what we do and act. Okay. Overall, the way to register the brain activity is the easiest is you open the skull and you put some electrodes directly on the neurons, and this is called electrocorticography. This is highly invasive method, and as every single surgical intervention poses certain risks. Way more propagated is using electroencephalographic signals, which literally place electrodes on the skull, which are with lower magnitude, and they are also with reduced bandwidth. Neurons talk to each other by exchanging ions. A flow of ions is called current, and the current creates electromagnetic field. Electronic EEG is the way to register the electrical component of this electromagnetic field, while magnetoencephalography is the way to register the magnetic component with that field. But you can see that it happens usually in specialized magnetically isolated rooms. This is a large and pretty much unmovable equipment. Besides those direct ways to register the human brain activity, we do have indirect methods. One of them common is functional near-infrared spectroscopy, which is literally measuring the oxygenation of the blood in the cortex. Presumably more oxygen consumption, this is a higher cognitive load or higher activity in that brain. But of course, our brains consume 30% of our body resources. This means that everything that happens in the skull impacts everything else. That includes the gaze, gesture, posture dynamics, heart rate, pupil dilation, galvanic skin resistance, dynamics of the gaze, etc., etc. So in many cases, those indirect indicators of the brain activity actually provide a more clean and more informative signals. In this quite actually old diagram, you can see on the horizontal axis is the time of reaction of our brain registering. The shorter this means, the faster changes we can detect. And on the vertical axis, you can see the granularity, how spatially we can localize. And you can see that EEG and magnetoencephalography in the upper left corner, they can do some mapping of the brain activity, and they have reaction time between millisecond to 1 second. fMRI imaging requires more averaging, up to a minute, but provides a little bit more granular registering of the brain activity. And here it's called field potentials, but this is ECOG. This is electrodes placed directly on the cortex, and you can see that we can go already on sub-millimeter of precision, and with the same timing as EEG and MEG. So in this table, if you summarize the signal-to-noise ratio, the temporal resolution, the spatial resolution, is it portable or not? Is it invasive or not? Of those common methods for registering the brain activity, we actually will find that electroencephalography is one of the best engineering trade-offs we can do, because it is tolerable signal-to-noise ratio, good temporal resolution, relatively good spatial resolution, portable and non-invasive. Otherwise, if you look at the electrical activity of the brain, you can see the short dendrite, the long axon. And if you put an electrode in a single neuron, you'll find that actually neurons talk to each other with spikes. They are around 40 millivolts, and their duration is around 1 milliseconds. So they cover the band between 0 and 1000 hertz, and how frequently the neuron spikes is activity measuring the excitement of that neuron. So technically, we call this pulse code modulation, frequency pulse modulation. Once you put electrodes on the cortex on top of that, you already register the brain activity of multiple neurons. And this leads to certain averaging, like a low-pass filter. And you see that the magnitude of the signal goes down, and also because of the averaging, the spectrum, the bandwidth of this signal goes down. And of course, we end up with electroencephalography, which is 1 to 10 microvolts is the voltage of the signal, and it is pretty much up to 50 hertz. There is almost nothing above that because the skull and the skin act like averaging filters. And in this signal, we distinguish most commonly four frequency bands: delta, everything below 4 hertz, theta between 4 and 8 hertz, alpha between 8 and 14, and beta is everything above 14 hertz. Okay. I'm pretty sure you have seen how an electroencephalogram looks like, but I'm showing this here just to underline the fact that it is not a human interpretable. Unlike the electrocardiographic signal, when the doctors go into a ruler main certain magnitudes, peaks, proportion, and can do some diagnostic, there is nothing like this in the EEG signal. We have to use computers to process it. So making one step back, where we're heading, why we're doing that. And the ultimate goal of the brain-computer interfaces is actually to provide a bidirectional communication with the brain, between the computer and the brain seamlessly in two directions. The neurostimulation, the way to put information into the brain in general is the ultimate goal is individual treatment of neurological disorders. And what we have today, either already in our hands or visible in relatively observable future, is we do have a bidirectional motor prosthetics. We get the signals from the motor cortex and can, with certain training, have an artificial arm or leg and to even or to control at least basically a wheelchair. There are certain speech prosthetics which allow to restore people who lost because of cancer or other reasons the larynx and cannot produce sound. And there are plenty of consumer applications. We'll talk about this a little bit later. On the neurostimulation side today, we usually can apply some voltage, pulses, electrical, to do partial treatment of neuropsychiatric diseases. One of the most interesting from doctor's standpoint is so-called biomarkers. Biomarkers translated on engineering language is quantitative measure of the degree of the disease. Let's say you have a Parkinson. How much? Can you give a number between 1 and 100 to get this accurate measurement of the level of Parkinson disease? Why this is important? Because then you can go and do a very close monitoring how the current medicine works. Is it gets better or worse or the same? And you can do this within a week or two, which is practically impossible today. And this allows you to try different medicines, so to make some steps towards a personalized treatment of those neurological diseases. We'll talk about the consumer applications a little bit later. What we will see eventually in the future is on the BCI side, this is a high definition sensory prosthetics. This means sight. This means hearing. Can we get the signal from a camera and feed it to the visual cortex and make this person to see? Can you get and intercept those 3,000 neurons between the cochlea and start to activating them and to make this person to hear? Of course, cognitive prosthetics is, can you make somebody who, okay, even if with normal brain functioning, but to learn a new language for a couple of hours. Just like in the Matrix movie, when you download that or one or another experience or knowledge. And of course, for the neurostimulation, can we basically automate this to have a reliable, individualized treatment of neurological and neuropsychiatric diseases? And of course, a lot of consumer applications. But because I work in the industry, and let's take a look at the industrial landscape. And you will see that brain-computer interfaces are not a science fiction. They are actually a rapidly growing market. And why this happens? Why today? There are three factors that enable brain-computer interfaces. The first is the progress in microelectronics. Those who are older like me remember that when you have to connect any electrode to a human body, you have to have a gigantic power supply block. According to the requirements of the standards, it should withstand 6,000 volts input or 20,000 volts in peaks, etc., etc. Otherwise, you can fry the subject, the patient. Today, it's basically a quarter of mobile phone size block, which contains all of the A to D converters, collect the signal, send them wirelessly, no need to powerful supply, battery life of 8, 12 hours. This is the progress which allows us to have electrodes on the brain for prolonged amount of time. There is a plenty of advances in the material science. 30, 40 years ago, placing an electrode on the skin or on the head of a patient and keeping it there for more than 1 hour outside of the lab conditions was pretty much impossible. Today we have glues, we have plastics, we can do 3D printing, we can apply materials which provide a much better contact with the skin. And of course, last but not least, this is the revolution in artificial intelligence, powered by signal processing using deep learning neural networks, and this all allows us to do stuff which was not possible relatively less than 5-10 years ago. Okay, and if you look at the market today, you'll see a lot of companies, and I have split them roughly in 5 columns: passive brain-computer interfaces, active brain-computer interfaces, interactive, bidirectional, for medical purposes, and those who design the core technology. And of course, there are 2 lines for non-invasive and invasive methods. And my personal interest actually lay in this group of 3 interfaces and group of 3 companies. I am not a part of a scientific institution which does medicine and medical equipment. And let's see some of the products. I cannot basically describe each one of them, but let's pick one in a column. So on the left is the passive BCI devices. One of them is Muse. It's just 5 electrodes on a band, and the original purpose is to use it for meditation and for relaxing. But hey, this is a Bluetooth 5 electrodes device. You can get the signals and do quite interesting stuff, as we will see later. On the active BCI devices, of course, Neurobal. That's the company which basically equipped with a VR headset with BCI, with EEG electrodes, and released the first game which is controlled by the brain. Of course, in the interactive BCI devices, this is the least developed area, and it is mostly neurostimulation. Halos Fort, you can see the electrodes, you put the headphones, you listen to a music, and they are short pulses of current in your head, and they stimulate your motor cortex. And after this, you go to the tennis court and start to learn very well the backhand and how to play the game. Let me put here a quick note that there are no statistically significant proven positive impact of this. Okay, it's more like a snake oil. And of course, there is a lot of medical applications. I would mention here in the core technology the FNIRS sensors from kernel, and OpenBCI, which allowed a lot of hobbies to play with BCI. But I'm part of a computer company. I do computer science. So for us, brain-computer interfaces is just a modality in the overall human-computer interface. So again, we distinguish here passive BCI when we just monitor the state of the human brain, like tension, emotion, fatigue, workload, etc., etc. We can do active BCI when we interact with the computer. In short, we want to decode several commands, several buttons, which in the neuroscience languages are called switches. And of course, the interactive BCI is the least developed when the computer talks back to the brain. as with everything, BCI is in a quest for the best scenario. I'll give you an example. For a long time, the speech recognition community thought that the native scenario is dictation. Microsoft in Windows Vista released one of the best speech recognizers, which with a closed-top microphone had above 99% accuracy, and the integration with Windows Microsoft Office Word was in parallel in anywhere. That was pretty much the best designed dictation software on the market, and still we didn't see much usage of that. And then we realized that actually the mouse and the keyboard is a more convenient interface because yes, you speak faster than you can type, but from the moment you have to create paragraph formatting, bold, italic, etc., you stop to speak and start and go and work with the keyboard and mouse. Absolutely the same. And then speech community found that the killer scenario is actually devices which don't have keyboard and mouse, and then it's easier to talk than to type in that keyboard. So that's exactly the main problem in brain-computer interfaces. The killer scenario where BCI is the most convenient, if not only, input modality in the computer interface, where it brings value, okay? And of course, I mentioned everything technical with BCI is super difficult. Variability from session to session, from person to person. You train a classifier, you take the electrodes off, you put them back, boom, your accuracy is 1/2. Not to mention from person to person. Even identical twins have different brain signals because initially the brain is kind of a oval, round sphere, and then when the cortex grows, it starts to wrinkle, but that wrinkling depends on the gravitation, on the position, and even identical twins have a different position in mommy's belly, and this is why they wrinkle differently. So even identical twins cannot borrow each other the classifiers. Reaction time. The signals are super noisy. We know that. So you need certain time for averaging, and one where for a passive brain-computer interface, you may wait an average for 30, 60 seconds, and one reading per minute is perfectly fine. For interactive brain-computer interfaces, you already are looking at reaction time of 1 to 2 seconds is already kind of too much. And again, scenario, that's the killer thing for brain-computer interfaces, okay? Otherwise, from my standpoint as a signal processing person, this is not something different than what we do. It's a pre-processing, some well-established for EEG signals, future extraction, and running certain classifier. But unlike audio, when we use hundreds of thousands of hours of audio to train our neural networks, here we do have a very limited number of labels. Short periods of braincom signals recorded, and let's say 10, 15 persons is kind of wow data set. And then you run it, and suddenly SVM works best because it is designed for that. Neural networks need way more data to perform, and there are a lot of tricks which have to be done, but the most important is data. Data, more data, okay? So what we can do with the active brain-computer interfaces, we can do direct decoding of the brain signals, of the intention of the user. That's motor imaginary. I will use my left hand, right hand, will think that I am moving, but we can detect this in the motor cortex. There is a visual imaginary, and Justin will talk about that. There is a speech imaginary. I mentally am talking, and eventually the brain signals I may be able to decode what exactly I'm saying. And some kind of mental efforts. Plenty of scenarios with evoked potentials. Let's say we have 3 buttons on the screen, they flash with different frequencies. The one we pay attention to that frequency pops up in the visual cortex, and we have to decode it. Of course, you can do the same thing with audio, auditory state response, and even with haptic, with some vibrating bracelets. You will see a little bit what we have. So, BCI and Microsoft research. First, this is on the upper line are people who are working. No one of us is a full-time. Those are all people who has main topic something else. In the lower right, you will see the consulting researchers we have had the pleasure to work with. And we have had 2 postdoctoral researchers for 3 years. And on the left is our interns, and Justin's name is actually mentioned twice here. Okay. So when we started the project, we decided to put some constraints. And the first was that we're going to do non-invasive registration of the brain activity. Simply because we don't believe that a sane person in normal health will allow us to open the skull and put the electrodes in the on the brain. This almost for sure means a fewer number of electrodes. We don't believe that the person of the future will go down the street with 64 channel EEG cap. So the BCI device should be focused on and installed into something we wear on our heads. Headphone, earbuds, glasses, virtual augmented reality glasses, or to look like this. And again, the quest for the scenario, this is the 3rd time you're hearing, and maybe there will be more. Of course, you start with the hardware and with the electrodes. Here is examples of our work in the in-ear electrodes, and this is a device which looks like a Bluetooth headset. You have 2 earbuds, goes above the ears, 2 more electrodes, electronics is on the neck. It looks like a Bluetooth headset, but it actually is. A stress measuring device. And of course, glasses, jointly with Natalia Kosmina from MIT Media Lab. And once we polish it, the 3D printing of rubber, of resin, and coating it with silver chloride, everything exploded, and you can see variants of EEG electrodes placed pretty much everywhere. This is our EEG electrodes equipped with virtual reality glasses, and our HoloLens 2 device equipped with EEG electrodes. Okay. So what we have done in the area of passive brain-computer interfaces, it is mostly measuring the workload and stress. And in general, that's not that difficult problem, considering that we can actually do a lot of averaging on the way. And here is one good example, using brain signals as a research tool for designing of certain Microsoft products. In this case, this is Microsoft Editor, the feature that when you start typing, fills the continuous, the word or the sentence. And the way what we are measuring here is called ERP, error-related potentials. When something unexpected happens, that oh shit moment is well detectable, and we did the classifier, and then our designers from Microsoft Editor were running different variants of their editor, and based on the most intuitive, the biggest number of, the lowest number of those error-related potentials, they made their own design decisions. In the area of active BCI, we have done work, and those are the vibrating bracelets on the hands, and we do a lot of interesting work. It's still, yes, we get above the chance classification error, but it is not yet ready for using in real interface. On top of that, the suggestion here is to have a closed loop BCI interface with ERP detector. And if we don't detect the ERP, this means that the decoder did the right classification, and then we can continue the training process on the fly. So next day, when you put the BCI electrodes, you can see here, this is the accuracy. This is the accuracy which is classifier is trained on the signals from the same session. The red is next session you lose, but if you do this closed loop adaptiveness, you can basically in 4 blocks by several decisions actually reach the accuracy of the trained on the same. And you can see here one example I'll give you with SSVP based also steady state visual evok potentials, how relatively quick for 5 classes we can basically with a 1 second average time we can actually get the accuracy we need. This is close to 100%, 95. And this is how it looks like. Let's say in the surgical room, the surgeon wears a HoloLens device, hands are busy, it's noisy. So then he looks at the given area, which is marked as a marker in HoloLens, and then you see those 4 buttons flashing. Here, the surgeon selects one of them, the BCI decides which one, and then this triggers something to pop up as a documentation. I can basically show you a quick video of that. If you can, I borrow, or I'm willing to stay a little bit late if you guys want to see, because for me the videos are one of the most interesting.
Hello, Michael. How are you today?
Can you hear the sound?
Better. This is Dr. Wang. I will be your doctor today. Do you mind if I do some
So
We have
this is the
sound, yes.
doctor, and the other person is the patient. And so this is the hands busy situation.
You can see the EEG signals from the electrodes that are placed on the back of the HoloLens on the doctor's head.
So the electrodes are here on the back where the visual cortex is, and then the doctor looks at a given point.
Through the HoloLens.
So this is his point of view,
Looks up, see.
and there is a right here a blue marker.
Looks at the button. 3 flash.
And looking at the blue marker activates the SSVP.
EEG is picking up which
They
one.
start to flash, and a proper document pops up. So the idea is coarse to fine selection. You don't want to have a 40 buttons flashing on your field of view. You have, again, you have a marker here, which indicates that there is a hidden button group, okay? So that's the main idea. But again, brains impact everything what happens in our body. And in this particular project, you will see speech recognition using, okay, let me rephrase, it is not a brain-computer interface, it is a biosignal computer interface. In this case, you see one of our interns instrumented with a lot of electrodes, but as a result, in the final project, we ended up with having just one IMU here, and okay, to start the video, I have to have a regular. Okay, now I can start it. So in this particular interface, there is a silent speech recognition.
I'm looking at that. You're making a silent speech recognition system. Oh, can I see something? Sure. We can play a guessing game with ChatGPT. I would say the word inaudible, and it would try to get a word. Yes, in what combined. Okay, can I guess a word? Sure. What do you want to play with? I just have strawberries, so let's go with strawberries. Let's try with strawberries.
So he is playing a game with ChatGPT and can basically say several words, up to 8. I think we get still a decent accuracy. Let's have one interaction and we will switch to the next video. So he moves the mouth, the jaw, and I'm here detects the movement. That's it. Biosignal based brain-computer interface. So let's keep the video. Go to the next. This is again a tongue gesture recognition. You keep your mouth closed and you move your tongue in a given gestures, and there are 8. You can see they are defined here. and let's see what we can do with this. So Mike is going to play an instrument using that. And the device is Muse, by the way, off the shelf. Oh, you got the idea, okay? So, in conclusion, brain-computer interfaces are really imagination captivating area for research. Usually when we have a BCI talk in our lecture rooms, we have 5-6 times more attendees than normal. And but the breakthroughs in microelectronics, material science, and AI actually are the enablers of today's state of the brain-computer interfaces. Plenty of applications in perspective, but we're not there yet. We still have to do a lot of research and to polish the technologies for everyday use by the general population. With this, I want to apologize for running 5 minutes longer, and I'm willing to stay as long as necessary to answer questions after that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ivan. I think it was a really great and inspiring lecture, and people really enjoyed it. And we're gonna do a Q&A session after the Dr. Kilmarks finished the lecture. So yes, let's say warm welcome to Dr. Justin Kilmarks, everybody. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you. All right. Justin, can you share your screen?
Yeah, just give me 1 second.
Okay, thank you. Take your time.
Okay. Hopefully you guys can see all that. All right. So thank you so much for inviting me to come talk today. My name is Justin Kilmarks, and I'm a research scientist with DCS Corporation, where I'm also serving as a government contractor with the Air Force Research Labs based out of the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. So at Wright-Pat, I'm with the non-invasive brain stimulation team. So towards the end of my talk, I'll give a little bit of an overview of the work that we have going on here. But for the talk today, I kind of just wanted to give like a broad look at some of the projects that I've been working on, starting from like undergrad research through my grad school, through the internship with Microsoft, and to what I have going on right now. All right, so I want to start off with what I did during my undergrad research at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. So I served as an undergraduate research assistant for about 3 years in a lab that was working on some brain-machine interfaces using a low-cost EEG device. We were using the Emotive Epoch, which you can see down there in that picture. I think it only has like, was it 14 or 16 channels in there? And so generally a pretty consumer grade device, not typically used for a lot of research applications. But we found some pretty good results with that and being able to translate it to controls of like a computer cursor on screen, a quadcopter drone being able to fly in like 2 or 3 dimensions, a remote controlled car, and even like a robotic arm. So for these different platforms, we were using what's known as an imagined body kinematics control paradigm. So that's a type of motor imagery where, like, if you're trying to say control a computer cursor on screen, you would imagine moving your right hand as if you're using the computer mouse. It's like if you want to move the cursor up, you would imagine moving your hand like forward or up. If you want to move it to the right, you would imagine moving your right arm like to the right. So when I joined the lab, we were still kind of getting started on all of this, and one of my main responsibilities was like translating these devices from just like the decoder inside the classifier into like a kinematic control for one of these external devices. So like we started with the quadcopter drone, eventually moved it into like the RC car, and my final project was the robotic arm. So I have a little bit of a video here of some of the devices at work. So this is really loud for me. I don't know about for you guys. But yeah, here in my lab, this I'm just gonna fast forward a little bit here. The first project that I was going to show was this RC car. So I'm going to pause real quick, see if we can look at it a little bit better. This device was actually kind of interesting because it was like a hybrid control paradigm for it. So if you can kind of see, there's like 4 little LEDs around the top of that device. So that used like the SSVEP, or the steady state visual evoked potential, like Yvonne kind of described in some of the talk before. So each of those lights flickers at a different frequency, and depending on like what the person's looking at, you can measure a similar frequency in their visual cortex. So if they want to move the car forward, they would look at the LED at the front of the car. If they want to turn it, they would look at one of the LEDs to the side. And to actually initiate motion of the car, they would do like the motor imagery. So in the video here, our participant is, looking at one of those lights and performing the motor imagery to push it like around the room. And so aside from having like the actual car there, we did some work to get kind of like a virtual reality version of it too. So this was a demonstration of it being used on just a computer screen. So like having it go through like a racetrack on the computer. But we also had a version that was in like the Oculus. So it was like a VR application to where you could have like the lights and everything and like move it around there. So this next part of the video is the control of the quadcopter drone. So I want to preface this by saying this was possibly one of the most like nervous points of my entire life, because my lab was selected to do like this demonstration for like all the board of advisors and like the dean of the College of Engineering at the University of Tennessee. And so I had to fly this drone with my brain in this tiny room, like directly at all these like people that are in control of our department. So it was super nervous. I was like sweating really bad and shaking, which is not great for an EEG application, but it went actually surprisingly well. My advisor is like standing right there, and you don't see he has like a broom beside him to slap it out of the air in case it goes a little bit haywire. But in the video here, the drone is going to fly forward, stop in front of this hula hoop, execute a 90-degree turn, and then fly through the loop there. So during this, I'm doing like the imagined body kinematics paradigm. So like if I'm imagining moving my arm forward, it's going to push the robot forward. If I'm resting, it's going to keep it stationary. And if I imagine like moving in a direction, it's going to turn the drone to the sides. And then the final one here is our robotic arm. So this became like my main project. Like the last year I was there, we had this like 6 degree of freedom robotic arm here, and I adapted our cursor control device to control like the movements of it. So like if you wanted to move the arm to the left, you would hit a target on the left side of the screen. If you want to like pick up an object that's below you, you'd hit the target at the bottom. So I created like this pretty simple, like sequential based object manipulation task to pick up different objects on a workspace and kind of move them around. So towards the end of my undergraduate degree there, I also had a internship with Oak Ridge National Lab, where I got to work a little bit more on like the programming aspect and like recreate some of our prediction algorithms in Python. We had been using MATLAB for a lot of this, and so I got to, try to beef up my coding skills a little bit, test out some different machine learning algorithms, and also learn how to apply all this in like a high performance computing environment, which was a really cool experience. So I wanted to kind of highlight this work because I think a lot of people in Longhorn Neurotech are probably in like their undergraduate stages. So I just want to say like, for me, this was probably one of the most rewarding experience I've had, like in my undergraduate career. I probably spent more time in our research lab than I did in a classroom because I really enjoyed the work that we were doing, and I got a lot out of it, and it really kind of set the pathway of what I wanted to do after I graduated. So, if you're at all interested in grad school or like research as a career field, I would strongly urge you guys to try to get involved at least in some capacity. I know there's a lot of really cool labs doing some like BCI work or other type of neurotech work around Texas. So you guys definitely have a great environment to kind of get involved. And, it's never too early or too late to try to reach out to some of the professors that, might have taught a class that you're interested in and see if there's something that you can get involved there. All right, so after my stay at the University of Tennessee, I came to the University of Texas in 2018 for their PhD program, and I joined the Rewire lab that was led by James Sulzer and the Loopy lab led by Jared Lewis Peacock over in the psychology department. And the first project that I was doing during my PhD looked a little bit different than like the EG BCI stuff that I did before. In this project, the main goal was to create a surrogate neurofeedback training target to improve fine motor movements after a person had a stroke. So what this means is if you've ever like seen somebody that has had a stroke, one of the most common things you might notice is some pretty severe motor impairments, particularly on one side of their body. And one of those motor impairments that you might notice is like the ability to individuate their finger movements becomes impaired. So like for us, we have a pretty good ability to, move just a single finger at a time. But for somebody that might have undergone a stroke, as they're trying to move one of their fingers, they all kind of move along with it. And the unfortunate thing is that a lot of times with, like the conventional physical therapy approach, this isn't really a target for a lot of that. Most physical therapy is looking at like broad motor movements, like moving your arm and like getting walking again and talking. And some of that fine motor control that's actually really important for everyday life is you kind of just hope that it improves along with the other stuff you're working on. So we wanted to use this approach known as neurofeedback, which is a way to give people like an inside look of what's happening in their brain as they're trying to make one of those finger presses. So how this kind of looks is, if you have a healthy person come in and they, are pressing down one of their fingers on this keyboard, you'll be able to use like fMRI to identify a distinct pattern of brain activity associated with each of those fingers. Now, the issue here is that, when you're in a scenario that somebody had a stroke, due to the damage from that lesion, like blocking off or altering those activity patterns in some way, it becomes difficult to like identify, like what pattern of activity you're trying to actually reinforce during the neurofeedback task. So we came up with this method to, try to create like a surrogate template based off of the data of healthy individuals, like identifying, what exactly one of those finger movements would look like in the brain, and use that as kind of our reinforcement target for the neurofeedback task later on. So for the results of that, the most like conventional way to make like a surrogate target like this is using anatomical alignment. So that would be like what you're seeing over here on this left chart. So this chart is showing the classification accuracy of the 4 different fingers based off of like here if they're anatomically aligned. So that's like taking all of our individuals' brain images and kind of overlaying them on top of each other and like making sure all the brain areas are kind of in the same general space. And then you just pick out an area of like roughly where the hand should be located. And so using like the information from that, we get like decent results of it. We found like 48% classification accuracy for between the 4 fingers, which is above chance, but honestly not super great for the application that we would need. So a few years before I did this, there was a newer technique that came out known as hyperalignment, which is like a functional based alignment of people's brain activity. So this is something that hadn't really been tested a whole lot, and it hasn't been done before in motor movements before this point. So we wanted to try to see, if this was something that we could use for this project. And so once we tried this hyperalignment approach, we found a significant boost in our classification accuracy up to like a little bit above 90%. So that was even approaching like with like a within subject classifier, like if you're using the person's own data, and like a healthy individual there. So like it was really working pretty well for us. So things were going very well for that project. I spent about like 2 years getting all this like validated and ready. We were ready to move on to the next step of that project and like take this into like a population like of healthy older adults that would have some deficits in their individuation ability just due to the natural progression of aging. I even built like a force-sensitive keyboard that could be used inside of the MR environment. So that way I can really track like behaviorally what's going on with that to see if we can see like any fine improvements or any like differences in their fine motor movements throughout the training. So we had all this ready to go. I had like the first two people scheduled to come in like the coming weeks. And like right as they were about to come in, that's when COVID happened and everything got shut down at the university. The scanner was closed for I don't even know how many months. And then even when it did open, I was working with kind of an older, vulnerable population. They really just didn't want to come in. They didn't want to risk having to come into campus to do an experiment like this. So needless to say, I was a little bit stuck in my research. So that's when I started kind of looking for some different opportunities to keep me busy during that time, and that's what ended up leading me to Microsoft. So I had my first internship with Microsoft in 2021. So this internship was a 12-week period during the summer. And so when I joined that, Ivan was my mentor during that period. And the task that he set forth for me was to create a like real-time imagery-based BCI that wasn't motor imagery. So motor imagery is by far like the most common and most tested like imagery-based BCI scenario. So he wanted to kind of know like, was there anything else that we could use to get like some pretty decent results out of? So started out with a bit of a literature search and kind of narrowed it down to using a visual imagery control paradigm. So visual imagery would be, in my opinion, like kind of a more direct interaction with the world around you. So like, for example, if you had like a visual imagery BCI for somebody that was like completely locked in and they wanted to control different applications in their house, like turning a lamp on or off, that person could just directly imagine the object that they're trying to work with in their mind, like that lamp, and the BCI can interpret that and control the device. Or even maybe taking it beyond to like a general population. Say you have this really cool setup where you have like a VR headset and EEG electrodes in that, and you're doing like a video game and you want to pick out something from your inventory, like a key to open a door or pull out your sword or something like that. You could just directly imagine that object to quickly pick it up. So I thought that that would be like a pretty neat application for here that really at the time when I started this hadn't been tested. I found like maybe 3 or 4 studies that had tried to do visual imagery with EEG, and the results were kind of hit or miss for those. So for this first task that I wanted to do, I just did a simple like real-time BCI classification of 3 different categories of when a person was picturing a face, when they were like imagining a scene, or when they were just resting. So this video here kind of demonstrates a little bit what the task looked like here. So again, this was during COVID times, so wasn't a whole lot of data being collected because I was in my kitchen alone during the summer. But the task that I had here, this would be like the training part of the experiment. So I receive a cue, like in this point, to just rest. So I'm trying to clear my mind as best as possible. Then in the next trial, I get a cue for like this face. I try to take in the features of it while it's on screen. And then when it disappears, I'm just trying to like remember it as vividly as possible during that blank period. So I did a couple runs of this training to create the classifier. I think at this point I was using like the SVM classifier for it. And then immediately after this would do like a real-time classification approach, which should be coming up here soon. Let's see. Yeah, so during the real-time classification, the image would pop up on screen again for the cue. As it would disappear, I would try to keep it like in my memory and picture it as best as I can. And then the classifier would spit out what it thinks I was thinking about. So in this case, it guessed it correctly as a face. So overall, this worked, kind of about like what we expected. I mean, visual imagery is definitely a difficult thing to decode. So we weren't expecting like 100% classification accuracy, but we did get statistically significant above chance level for this. So it kind of boded well for some future work to do together. So whenever I did eventually come back to my PhD program at Texas, we decided with my advisors and with Yvonne to kind of keep working on this because I was definitely interested in. It was kind of bringing back to the EEG BCI stuff that like I knew and loved from my undergrad. Um, so once I came back, we came up with this new project to map the representational space of visual imagery. So this was really just a way to, kind of figure out what is possible with visual imagery, like what we can actually decode from that. So I came up with this experiment that was kind of replicating some stuff that had been done previously in like fMRI literature. There's been a bunch of papers like by Kriegescourt and some others that have created this experiment using different categories of like human bodies, human faces, non-human bodies, and non-human faces, and natural and man-made objects. And the idea is that you can show people a bunch of these different images and just like based on the brain activity, judge like how similar, how different they are. Um, in an EEG standpoint, the best way to do that is just doing a classification. And if you have a higher classification score for that category, that means it has a more distinct pattern of brain activity. So I just wanted to kind of map out this space and see, like, for example, faces probably should be one of the easiest things to decode for that, but is it possible to also get like, being able to tell between like a human face and an animal face and so on. So how that task was laid out, the participants in this first went through like a familiarization period where they would see an image from one of those categories along with the word association below that. And so they'd have a couple minutes to kind of click through these images and try to memorize what each of those looked like, so that during the actual trial, they're just getting that like word cue for the image, like in this case, the goat. And then during the imagery period, they'd have to kind of bring that back into their mind and try to picture it as clearly as possible. So the participants here did 2 sessions of this. There was, again, like 6 categories of images, and each category had, I think, like 5 different objects in it. And the first thing that I was interested in is just like broad, like the 6th level kind of classifier. Are we able to tell when they're thinking of a person's face versus a body, an animal face versus an animal body, and so on? So we tried a lot of different classification approaches for this. One of the ones that I'm going to show you the result from here is using this LSTM network, which is a neural network. The LSTM, or a long short-term memory network, is kind of useful for EEG applications because it can benefit from having like recurring time points being passed to it. So like, with the brain, stuff in there doesn't just happen like immediately. You can have like the time points leading up to that could also be informative for your classification of there. So an LSTM is able to kind of make use of all that. So once we use this network for here, unfortunately, I wasn't able to achieve anything statistically significant above chance level. So what you're seeing here, if you're not too familiar with it, is known as a confusion matrix. So you have like the actual class that the person was thinking versus the predicted class that the classifier thought or was predicting that you were thinking of. So what you would want to see is a nice bright diagonal through the center, indicating that it got all of the categories correct. But here, that's not the case. It's kind of all over the place. We're getting like around 20% classification accuracy where chance is like 16 and a half. So there were some categories like, human faces and natural objects that looked, kind of promising there. But, overall, we weren't getting a great result. So now, while I was doing all of this, there was a paper that was published that was doing honestly like a very similar approach to what I was doing. They had this EEG visual imagery task, and they used something known as a black hole algorithm to train their convolutional neural network that they were using for the prediction there. So they had this task set up where the people were doing like 13 different categories of visual imagery, and they used this black hole algorithm to identify the most optimal hyperparameters for their neural network. So I won't get into the technical details of how that black hole algorithm worked, but essentially what it does is, when you have a neural network, there's a lot of different parameters that you have to tune for that to get like an accurate prediction. So there's like however many layers you have in your network, how many different nodes in each of those layers, how fast you pass data through it. There's like a lot of things that go into tuning these. So this black hole algorithm was a way to kind of iterate through that and pick out the best parameters for each person. And interestingly enough, for this, they weren't actually creating like one general network that could be used for all the different people. They built like an individual network for each person specifically. And they found that this worked really well for them. Between like 13 classes, they got like 27 or 20% classification accuracy, which doesn't sound great again, but for visual imagery, that was like super impressive. Like that was one of the best results that I've seen from that. So I wanted to try to apply this to the data that I had to see if I can get anything out of it. So I was digging through their paper, trying to replicate the results, and no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't do it. It just came out as chance level every single time. I eventually reached out to the authors trying to figure out, what I was doing wrong from this. They ended up sending me the code that they used for their experiment, so I kind of adapted it to what I was doing and finally got my first significant result here. We got like 27% classification accuracy. We start seeing that nice diagonal come through that's showing like the prediction accuracy was looking good. Um, but it still kept bothering me, like in the back of my mind, why was I not able to do this in the code that I had? And I was even talking to them and sharing what I had with them, and like, why was I not able to replicate this? Because they look honestly identical what we were doing. And that's when we both found an error in their code that unfortunately invalidated theirs and my results. So what's happened in there is as they were going through this algorithm to try to create the most optimal network to predict this, they were churning through the data over and over again and trying to kind of tweak things little by little, but they weren't resetting the network every time it passed the data through. So essentially, it was seeing that data over and over and over again, and then later on being tested on that same data. So it's kind of peeking at the stuff that it's about to be tested on. And you can't really do that with classification. So once we tweaked that one line of code that reset the weights on the classifier each time, both their data and my data all went back down to chance level. So super big bummer for that. So we decided to kind of move on from there and see if we could, get something still out of visual imagery. And I designed this new task that kind of simplified the paradigm into, instead of 6 categories with a bunch of different images, we just had 4 categories of animals, faces, objects, and scenes, and just a single image from each of these to try to get a little bit more data from each of those categories. And to make it hopefully a little bit easier for the participants too, I had them each select an image that they want to use throughout the experiment. So they can pick out an animal that, maybe looks like a pet that they can more easily bring to their mind and imagine, or pick out like a celebrity face that they're, really familiar with rather than just some random picture I found on the internet. So we also included in this a couple different tasks here. So the first one was this like short-term imagery period. So this is something that, was done a lot in pretty much all of the previous visual imagery experiments that I found. So this would be like where you would give the person the actual image as like the cue, and then the imagery period would be immediately following that, and the person's just trying to kind of hold that object in their working memory and go from there. And so I was kind of arguing in this paper that, this wasn't really a true test of the capabilities of visual imagery. Because if you were to have like an actual BCI trying to make use of visual imagery, it would be more spontaneous where the person is pulling the object from long-term memory and not having that like concrete cue right before that. So I had this additional condition where instead of actually seeing the image before the imagery period, they would just receive like an auditory cue of like face, and then they would have to try to bring that object back into their mind and picture it as clearly as they can from that. So what I found from this experiment, again, first with the classification accuracy between those 4 different categories when the person is actually looking at the image, it came out to around like 42 or 43% accuracy, which is, again, above chance, pretty good for visual observation. It was on par with, some of the other literature in this area. So that was kind of to be expected. But then onto the decoding of the short-term imagery period. So once the person, is looking at the image, it disappears and they're trying to hold that in their mind. Our classification accuracy is around like 30, 31%, which is statistically significant above chance. So that was kind of nice that we actually got our first significant result of being able to decode visual imagery from this. But then when we looked at the long-term imagery period where they just get that auditory cue and they're trying to bring that same image back to their mind, the classification accuracy was only like 28%, like 27 or 28%, which didn't pass the significance test for that. It was kind of close, but it didn't quite get there. There were some participants that were above that threshold, but yeah, overall on the average, we weren't able to decode from like long-term memory like that. So what we learned from these experiments is that honestly, visual imagery is hard, but it might still have some potential to be like a BCI control strategy, because we did see that we could decode the item level imagery above a significant threshold from EEG, but that spontaneous visual imagery from long-term memory was a little bit more difficult to decode. There is a whole lot of work to still be done in that area. This was just a first look offline with a kind of a limited amount of data for this. So Yvonne kind of talked a little bit about in his talk, it really helps to have like an actual online BCI scenario for this to, allow the person to kind of work with the classifier, adapt their strategy to get like a good strategy that gives them good results. But then there's also ways to adapt the classifier to the person, like how he was using those error-related potentials for that. So this way, the person's adapting to the program's adapting to the person, and the prediction could eventually get better over time. So there might still be some promise there in that area. So after I left the University of Texas, I started working with the Air Force Research Labs here at Wright-Patterson. And the projects that I'm working on here are on optimizing performance using brain stimulation. So unfortunately, I don't have any slides to really show you some data or details about my experiment because I wasn't able to get those slides cleared in time for this talk. So I'm just going to have to kind of give you a broad overview of some of the work that we're doing. So we're interested in using different types of brain stimulation, but the one that we're most looking at is this transcutaneous vagal nerve stimulation. So the vagus nerve runs through your neck, kind of like around where you can feel your pulse, and it goes up through an area of the brain known as the locus ceruleus, which is in your brainstem. So the locus ceruleus, or the LC, is like the primary center of neuroepinephrine for the brain. So that's kind of like the fight or flight chemical. So, targeting the vagus nerve and hitting the LC kind of releases that neuroepinephrine to kind of, wake you up, make you feel more alert and ready to go. So we found that using this device, it's has like these two electrodes on the top. You hold it up to your vagus nerve and it supplies a low level current to for about like 4 minutes. And we've seen that using this can help like accelerate training times, help people sustain their attention for longer durations. It can reduce the effects of fatigue and improve the person's mood. So we've done most of our work in the area of like fatigue mitigation. So we do a lot of like sleep deprivation studies in my lab. A lot of these, they keep people awake inside the lab for like 24 to 36 hours where they're doing like tasks continuously throughout the night. And we found that, people that are getting the vagus nerve stimulation are, having better performance on the tasks that they're doing, but they're also reporting that they feel like a little bit more energized and they have like better subjective mood ratings compared to people that just get like a placebo stimulation. And we also do some work on like performance, kind of accelerating on training using this device because the way that the LC kind of connects to the brain, it has a lot of like far-reaching points throughout it, like through areas of like the prefrontal cortex, the thalamus, the hippocampus, all areas of the brain that deal with like alertness, wakefulness, attention, and memory. So we've seen kind of as a byproduct of this stimulation, people are able to kind of learn some difficult tasks a lot quicker than people that weren't receiving the stimulation. So like the project that I'm working on specifically is an MRI experiment where we're trying to use the vagus nerve stimulation to enhance training during like a satellite imagery task. So like we have people looking at these satellite images and they're trying to pick out like threatening targets in it. Honestly, it's a really difficult task to do if you're not familiar with like satellite imagery. So we get a lot of like naive people that haven't done this before. In their first session, they come in. It's really a struggle to try to find anything in this. But we did this experiment over a period of 5 days where we have one group that's receiving the active stimulation and one group that's receiving sham stimulation. And we see that people that are getting the active stimulation are actually having better performance over the period, and they're able to get higher scores more quickly during that task as well. And so my job is doing this inside the MRI scanner to try to get a little bit better idea of what's actually happening in the brain from the stimulation. So yeah, that's a little bit of an overview of some of the projects that I've been working on and what I'm working on now. So thank you guys so much for listening. And I just wanted to also say thank you to everybody at Longhorn Neurotech. Like I'm super excited that you guys finally have like a group down there that's devoted to neurotech. So I just really am looking forward to see what it does over the next coming years. But yeah, so thank you so much for inviting me today. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now, or you can email me, connect with me on LinkedIn or something afterwards, and we can talk later.
Yes. Yeah. First, thanks for the great lecture. Just yeah. We're gonna have like very short 10-minute question session if still are able to if you're fine for having questions. I think it's really first. I think it's really interesting to see your recent researches and how it like eventually end up like some accuracies. And I think it's like there's lots of potential of brain decodings, like I mean dream decoding stuff. So I think it was really fun to also hear your undergrad researches too. Yeah, and also we're gonna Longhorn Neurotech, we're also gonna do some similar like drone control researches the upcoming semester. So I think it's very cool to listen to your project. And thanks again.
Awesome.
And Julian, he's gonna take care about our questions. We got collected the questions from our student audiences, so we're gonna maybe pick some questions seems are interesting or important. So Julian will take care of it.
Hello, hello. I'm Julian. I'm the research and development lead of Longhorn Neurotech. Thank you both very much for coming. You had our rapt attention the entire time. So we'll try to get through a couple of questions. We had a ton, so apologies to anybody who we aren't going to get their question. This whole thing is being recorded, and you have Dr. Tajif and Dr. Kilmark's information, so feel free to send your questions their way. So to begin with, I guess something very relevant to us undergrads. I guess this goes to both of you. I want to start with Dr. Kilmark's because he has the most present knowledge on this, having just gone through his PhD. But what is the best way to crack into the brain-computer interface space as an undergraduate or a new graduate looking to move into the industry after graduation, with or without a graduate degree? And as a follow-up for Dr. Tashif, what generally are you looking for people that are coming into the space after undergrad or graduate school?
Yeah, so I guess, talked a little bit about that when I was going through my undergraduate research. Like, honestly, the best way to kind of crack into that is just, get involved with it. Like, you have so many resources as an undergrad student there at Texas. So just talk to your professors that are doing similar type of research, find the grad students that are doing projects that are interesting to you, and just try to, meet with them after class sometimes, see how you can get involved with their research. participate in their studies that are going on, so you can kind of see how the research environment is working, and just try to get as much experience as you can. Like having the direct kind of experience outside of the classroom is really beneficial. Like being able to work on these projects, learning some coding skills, some maybe machine learning skills that you probably aren't getting depending on like what degree that you have. Just trying to kind of like explore the different areas. And also don't be afraid to kind of like try some different experiences through that too, to try to kind of like figure out exactly what your area that you're interested in. And start early too. Like I started, I think, my second year there, so I got to spend like 3 full years in the lab, and that was super beneficial. I mean, even if you're a senior, get involved right now. It's not too late, but like, even like if you're just a freshman coming in and you're kind of afraid, like, oh, I don't know anything about this. Honestly, if you're like a mentor or a mentee of me, like I'm super happy to kind of work with you and teach you. And I feel like a lot of grad students there would be the same way. And if you're, really wanting to get involved with that and spend, a couple years in that lab, you'll definitely learn a whole lot you'll be able to take towards like industry and everything after that.
Brilliant. And Dr. Tasha, what are you generally looking for in the people coming into the space?
Let me pick from Justin, start early. This is the key, because the earlier you start to get your hands dirty, the more you know, the more you can do, and this will make you preferred candidate for whatever somebody is looking for. The way Microsoft Research, so this is a research organization of an industrial company, okay? It's an industrial research lab. The way we interact with academia is mostly through hiring summer interns. We are around 1,200 researchers in Microsoft Research, which makes it one of the largest research organizations in computer science. And we roughly have around 1,200 interns in the summer. Literally, I'm in my office now. This is the headquarters of Microsoft Research Lab in Redmond. And we are around 400 researchers. In the summer, we have 400 interns. It looks like university. So we do hire a lot of them. This summer, I had 7 interns in my research group. What I'm looking for is 2 things. A, how good is this applicant? B, how good fit is for the specific project. Justin kind of just said how he started to be an intern in Microsoft Research. I'll give you some numbers. I had 7 interns and I have 327 applicants for this summer. So basically the selection is one of 30, 20, 30, 40 based on the group. You have to be very, very good. The way it happens is first we select those. Usually, as every expert think, is you start to remove people from the bottom of the list. So we start to remove those who they may be good, but they are with experience that we literally don't look for. And once the list of candidates is boiled to around 30-ish, then the difficult part starts, because you can imagine how good is every single candidate in this list. And then, because our internships are for PhD students. And PhD student is a person who is trained to do research. And the way you do research is by publishing scientific papers. And this means that when I open the CV, first I look at the upper part to see the qualification, and then flip and go and see the number of publications and how well they fit to the project. And to underline one more thing, from all of those selected one of 30 interns, just a few return for a second time. So this is what opens a lot of doors. One line in your resume after you defend your PhD saying that I have been intern in Microsoft Research means a lot. 2 lines of this, Justin pointed and went to work wherever he wants. So this is for the PhD students. Most of the companies do have undergrad programs, including us in Microsoft Research. So those are students which we select very limited, around 40-ish for the entire Microsoft Research. At least in my team, we treat them in the same way as PhD students. They get a well-framed project to work on, and pretty much the frame is basically without ceiling. So you achieve as much as you can. And to give you an example, the largest signal processing conference is called ICASP, International Conference for Audio and Acoustic Signal Processing. One of our undergrad students last year won the Best Paper Award in ICASP. Think about around 3,000 to 5,000 publications, and her paper was basically awarded the Best Paper Award. So there is nothing to prevent you as undergrads to do and to achieve more. Find the lab, and by the way, in the same way as Justin, I show it up in one of the labs in my university when I was third-year student. When I was fourth-year student, I was not going to the classes. I was going early in the morning in my lab, hang my coat and doing work and getting out for classes. So my main residence was actually in the lab, and this is where I started. Later, after I graduated as a researcher, later I became assistant professor in that entire group, till the moment Microsoft hired me in 1998, and I moved here in Redmond, Washington. So don't be ashamed to get your hands dirty and to see what you can do. Find the professor, find the lab which does what you're interested of, and do it. At least if you start early, you'll have time to say, this is not exactly what I want to do. This next lab actually does something more interesting for me.
All right, thank you. Let's see. I'm gonna go for one to Justin. It's relevant to us. Which features did you select for your visual classification, or was it just entirely deep learning?
Yeah, so for the features that I was using for this was primarily like alpha band features, so like stuff in the 8 to 13 hertz range of brain activity. I think for my like the second project of that, where I actually got a significant result, it was like the mean the mean frequency in that alpha band in I think I did like it was a 3 second or 2.5 second long period, and I had like 3 overlapping windows from that that was fed to the classifier.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. A question for Dr. Tashov. Let's see. So you mentioned a little bit about the emerging medical applications for brain-computer interfaces. You specifically talked a little bit about the a visual field looking for present information in AR. But question from some of the biomedical people here: how would you convince medical professionals who, as of right now, would be much more likely to recommend medications to use neurostimulation and brain-computer interfaces to treat those illnesses in the future when this technology starts to become much more powerful? Like, what are the barriers that need to be broken for this?
Hey, look, doctors are people as everybody else. By the way, my specialization was medical electronic equipment. I spent the last 3 months of my studies before to get my diploma engineer degree in a hospital. So I'm quite familiar of the psychology of doctors and the way they accept and treat new technologies. In short, when the technology starts to work, it will be accepted. Today, we're in research phase. We get some statistically iffy results. We don't know yet how this works, well this works, but overall, once it is polished enough, and you can show them that it helps, the medical circles will try to accept it. It's a tool, and that this has to be clearly delivered to them. It's a new tool in their hands to measure the level of the degree, to help them treat the patient. Everything new initially gets certain resistance. That's normal. We are all humans. But I have no concerns that when the technology is polished, it will be accepted and used by the medical doctors.
Okay, cool. Another question for both of you. What do you see right now as the largest blocker in terms of the widening applicability of neurotechnology for all sorts of applications? I mean, like the hardware side, the biomaterials side, the algorithms themselves, and the learning algorithms that we use to apply to the data, etc. Dr. Kilmarks, do you want to start?
Yeah, I feel like Yvonne might be a better judge on this one coming from the industry side point. But like I guess from my kind of thought, I think there's a lot of different areas of this, of translating it from, something that works inside of the lab into something that works in the real world. I think like one of the things Yvonne talked a little bit about in his talk is just like kind of the wearability and the portability of a lot of the hardware that we have right now. It seems like there is a trend of like kind of moving that towards something that is a little bit more wearable and more easy to use, like outside in the real world. Like there's a lot of companies like Neurable that are trying to have these electrodes and like headphones or something that you can easily use. But I think, one of the big barriers with that, is trying to get like good signal quality in a real world environment too. Like in the lab, it's very controlled. You're using electrodes that have like gel under it and like kind of a quiet room where a person's doing the task. But then, bring that outside of the lab, you have like these dry electrodes, a person's walking around and doing other stuff. There's noise, electrical noise from the environment and stuff. So, it becomes not only just like a hardware issue, but like a signal processing issue of dealing with all this interference as well. So yeah, I think there's just like a lot of different things to account for when you bring it outside of the lab.
Did you want to add anything onto that, Dr. Tashev?
I mentioned it, that's the scenario. The usage, find the place where brain-computer interfaces are the most convenient input modality for the computer or the only possible modalities. And we sense that this is hands busy and noisy environments. Basic analogies with HoloLens. You put those augmented reality and you have gaze, voice, and gesture. And let's say on the manufacturing floor, easily the voice can be rendered out because it is too noisy and the worker holds tools, protective gloves, and suddenly you get a gaze, which is kind of mouse. You need the two buttons. And that's the role of the brain-computer interfaces. So this is how we see it. That's finding the scenario is the opening for this technologically. We are either there or can easily catch up with new electrodes. Of course, gel-based electrodes has Justin pointed out are out of question for the general population. We have to use dry electrodes. There are plenty of things we can do today, at least for us in our lab. 3D printed resin coated with silver chloride works best. We have getting for trial some electrodes which are actually made of rubber. They have basically a long legs, maybe 10 millimeters, and you They are flexible, so you press it, and it kind of provides a good contact, and this all is coated with silver chloride, and it's quite nice and convenient and works quite well for the needs of the general population. We do have the electrodes, we do have the materials, we do have the computing power and the algorithms. What we need is the scenario, and of course, as with everything technically, a lot of work to polish it and to make it to usable and feasible for the general population. I cannot resist here to give you an example. My team created all of the audio processing algorithms for all all four audio systems in HoloLens 2. The spatial audio, capturing of own voice, etc., etc. So I had the opportunity to watch how this device grows from pretty much the very beginning. The initial version of HoloLens is you sit in a chair, they bolt your head. There are those screens in front of you, which cannot do any gaze tracking, etc. And under the table were 6 big, powerful computers. That was the zeroth version, the prototype of HoloLens. Then we went to the stage when you were actually already on your head, the screens, and behind you with cables. There is a cart, and some person just pushes the cart, but you still can go and experience augmented reality. The next iteration was when you had some super powerful laptop in a backpack on your back with some batteries, and now you can move and do the gestures. And a lot of time passed when we saw the prototype out, when you actually have the computer integrated into the device, and it's one device which you wear on your head. A lot of time, from 2011 till 2015, 4 years. So when the time came, and there is a need and open scenario for that, I think technologically we can do it. We have the capabilities today. The quest is scenario where what will be acceptable for the general population. And again, making one step back, we all have heard about the Moore's law, how the performance of the CPUs increase with the doubles every 4 years, etc., etc. I would say that today the speed of the technology progress is constrained by the change of the generations. And it's, instead of exponential, already will become linear, not because we cannot do it, because we don't have people that will accept and embrace the new technology. That's just my take. Okay.
Thank you very much. We are running out of time, so I'm going to pose one very last question to y'all. And this is once again for both of you. So given the challenge of the limited data available often with biosignal processing, what current transfer learning or few-shot learning algorithms and techniques do y'all think shows the most promise going forward? I know, Dr. Kilmarks, you were talking about a lot of work with convolutional neural networks, but there's a lot of work and a lot of buzz going on right now about tons of new other methods, whether they be liquid time constant or transformers if you have enough data. So what do you see as the models going forward for this kind of classification and use? And let's start with Dr. Kilmarks.
I'm going to pass this one to Yvonne because I do not do transfer learning stuff. That is outside of my area.
Okay, let's make a step back. Learning through data is nothing new. The machine learning algorithms are here from a while. There are papers for neural networks in 1980. But the general idea is if you see this as input, generate this as an output. And this is the core of supervised machine learning algorithms. They can be more classic using statistical signal processing, Gaussian mixture models, hidden Markov models, but then they go and boil through SVM to the modern fully connected neural network or neural networks that connect the state. But overall, the process is input data, labels, and you do it. This sooner or later basically saturates. In audio, we saturated around 1 million hours of audio. We have not saturated yet in the biological signal processing. What comes next is transition from supervised learning to non-supervised learning. And that's exactly what those large language models are. Transformers are the current structure of the neural network, the building blocks use it. Tomorrow it might be something else. But the point is, we pour the entire text in the entire internet and train the damn neural network. And there is no need somebody to tell the neural network, this is that, this is that. No labels. It is just you pour the data, use some sophisticated algorithms, and somehow the neural network in the process of training tries to make sense of the entire text on internet. This is the key transformation here. And after this, technically, in most of the cases, the structure is so-called encoder-decoder. You have a lot of data and features, and you start the neural network to get the broad input to get to shrink, and you get down the boil to assemble relatively low dimensional vector, and then it expands again, and you try to restore the input. Then you cut the upper part, and what is left is so-called hidden representation or latent space representation. And this is a technique which is used before, but the point is somehow the neural network makes the gist of whatever is the signal and boils it down to this narrow vector. And this is exactly what happened with large language models. Technically, yes, they keep a different decoder, so you can ask questions and the large language model can answer them. But also there is an application when from GPT-4, you can get any text as input and get this representation, which contains the gist. And let's say you want to do emotion detection from text. You can use this latent space representation and train a relatively tiny classifier on top of that with a limited amount of labels, let's say 10,000 labels, and suddenly that thing works damn well. Same thing is valid for video, same thing is valid for audio, and already we have 3-4 papers published on so-called foundation models for EEG. So they took around a couple of terabytes of EEG data. That's the largest, pretty much QDelf collected every single EEG signal they could put their hands on and trained the first paper on this foundation model. We have consequent papers from University of South California and one from Microsoft Research Asia. So that's the key, because now you can use this foundation model to get this latent space representation, and then with your very limited amount of labels, let's say you have 1,000 or 3,000 labels, you can create a tiny classifier, and presumably this is going to work better. And it will, because it worked for text, it worked for audio, it worked for video. So this is where I see where we are going with the biological signal processing. Of course, the logical question is what is next? Okay, supervised training, unsupervised training, where we go? It is very difficult to predict the future for this very quickly moving area. But my guess is that we go to non-training at all. Pretty much a neural network that is capable to summarize the data it sees and to learn by itself. There are already certain algorithms in that area. They are damn slow, practically unusable, but hey, the neural networks themselves were unusable in 1980. That's exactly Jeff Hinton's brilliant idea to call his paper instead of new way to train neural networks and everybody to say, oh, we tried this in 80s, it doesn't work. He called it deep learning and look and sounded like something new. And everybody took the code and tried it and it worked. And 6 months passed before somebody to say, wait a minute, those deep learning thing is the old neural networks, just he found a way to train it in this backprop training. So, hey, you get Nobel Prize for a reason. So let's see, we're going to be witnessing amazing progress. And you guys are those who are going to drive it forward and to push it forward. So stay tuned. Amazing things and development is coming.
Agreed. Thank you both very much for being here. Thank you for answering all of our questions. Can we get a big round of applause for our two guys?
Thank you, Ivan, and thank you, Justin. I do really appreciate it, and hopefully people grabs like a brief overview of like how this industry research works, and hopefully we could benefit like a big Texas BCI, not only Texas, broader impact to the BCI community. Thanks again. I do really appreciate your time and effort. I think this is the end of a presentation, and
Thanks so.
thanks for
Thank you very
audience
much,
too
Justin.
for joining this cool events.
And audience, remember, this is being recorded. You have their information. If we didn't get to your question, I hope I'm not overstepping by saying, please send those questions directly to Dr. Tashev and Dr. Kill.
Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure for me to talk with students. Again, I have been 14 years university professor, remember that. So, I really enjoyed the conversation tonight. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Have a good night. Bye.